Rain lashed against the village square as mud churned under hundreds of feet. The air was thick with smoke and the metallic scent of wet ash, rising from the smoldering remains of huts at the edge of the encampment. A circle had formed around the stranger, dozens of tall blue warriors standing shoulder to shoulder, their armor of woven metal leaf glinting faintly in the stormlight. In the center stood a woman in plaited scale, her hair pale as frost and braided down to her waist, eyes bright with fury. Every spear around her pointed inward. The human at their center barely moved. His coat was shredded, his boots coated in filth, and across his shoulder hung the snapped remains of a weapon, half spear, half banner, its shaft splintered, its blade still wet with blood. He dropped it into the mud at her feet, and the dull sound cut through the thunder. "A message," he said. The circle tightened. The warriors shifted, muttering in their guttural tongue. Lyra of the White Strand, commander, chieftain, daughter of the fallen chief, stared down at the weapon. Her hand tightened around her own spear. "You bring my father's death like a gift," she said, voice cold as steel. The human met her gaze without flinching. "No," he said. "Like a warning." A ripple went through the crowd. Lyra's nostrils flared. "You dare speak of warning after what you've done?" He nodded slowly. "Because the next one won't be for you. It'll be for whoever sent him to burn the coast." She took a step forward, the mud squelching beneath her boots. "You killed a war chief of the Tideborn. You trespassed on sacred ground. And now you walk into his village with his weapon in your hand." He met her words with silence. "Why?" she demanded. He finally spoke, his tone low and even. "Because if I didn't, your father's fire would have reached my camp by dawn." Lightning struck beyond the palisade, briefly illuminating the two of them, the soldier and the chieftain's heir, face to face, mud and storm between them. He didn't look like much, soaked leather, blood on his sleeve, eyes ringed with exhaustion. But there was something in his stance that unsettled her tribe, the way he didn't bow, didn't tremble, didn't yield. Lyra raised her spear. "You speak like you understand this land," she said. "But you are a thing blown here by chance, by the wind's pity. You should have stayed wherever you came from." "I tried," he said simply. "But your people made that impossible." Her eyes narrowed. "We fought invaders." He stepped closer, his voice cutting through the rain. "You burned farmers." Gasps rippled through the circle. One of the warriors snarled and lunged forward, but Lyra raised a hand to stop him. "You would accuse the Tideborn of slaughter." "I buried them," he said quietly. "They didn't have your blue skin. They didn't even know what a Tideborn was. They were just trying to grow food where the sea hadn't swallowed everything yet." The crowd murmured, their voices darkening. Lyra's spear tip trembled. "Lies," she hissed. "You think your words will break us?" He reached into his coat and threw something into the mud. It landed with a wet slap, a small carved idol, charred, its wood blackened but its shape still clear. The markings were Tideborn script. The crowd recognized it instantly. "That was found near their fields," he said. "Guess you didn't mean to leave it behind when you torched the place." The air thickened. The warriors looked to their leader, waiting for her word. For the first time, Lyra's certainty wavered. The charm had been her father's, his personal totem, carved from driftwood. Her stomach twisted. "You speak too much, human," she said finally. "Then stop me," he replied. She moved before she realized it, her spear slicing through the air. He ducked, mud spraying as her weapon carved a furrow beside him. He rose fast, catching her shaft and twisting it from her grip. The two froze, him holding her weapon, her staring in shock. The crowd erupted in shouts, but neither moved. He tossed the spear back to her. "You fight like your father," he said. "But you listen worse." Her jaw clenched. "You insult my blood." "I'm giving it context." He turned slightly, gesturing toward the smoking huts at the far edge of the camp. "That fire. That's not war. That's stupidity. Your father was good at both, but one of those gets everyone killed." She stared at him, every word cutting deeper than a blade. "And you think you're better?" "No," he said. "Just still alive." The simplicity of it silenced her. For the first time, she saw him not as an intruder or monster but as something harder to dismiss, someone who had seen too much and walked away from it still standing. "You bring this warning," she said finally, "but what do you want in return?" He met her gaze. "I want it to end. The war. The reason for it." Lyra looked past him, to the horizon where smoke and sea met. "You think one warning changes centuries?" "Someone has to start somewhere," he said. "Might as well be me." She studied him for a long moment. "And if I say no? Then you'll be burying more than your father by the end of the month." Her grip tightened on her spear. The crowd stirred again, whispering, waiting. She turned to them, then back to him. "You come here alone," she said. "You kill our chief. You demand peace. And you expect to leave alive." He shrugged. "Depends on how reasonable you are." The faintest ghost of a smile touched her lips, though her eyes were still sharp. "You're either the bravest man I've ever seen, or the stupidest." "Usually both," he said. The storm began to ease. Smoke thinned into mist. Lyra lowered her spear. "Take him," she ordered. Two warriors stepped forward cautiously, binding his hands with braided vine. He didn't resist. "You'll speak before the council," she said. "They'll decide whether your warning matters." "And if they don't," he asked, "then the wind that brought you here will carry your ashes home." He gave a small nod. "Then let's make it worth the trip." As they led him through the mud toward the longhouse, the crowd parted in silence. Some watched with anger, others with curiosity. The war had always been simple before, Tideborn versus the outsiders. Now, for the first time, someone had stepped into their storm and thrown back a piece of it. Inside the longhouse, firelight flickered across carved walls. The smell of salt and smoke lingered. Mason, though they didn't yet know his name, stood bound in the center while the council gathered around the circular pit. Lyra took her place among them, spear now resting across her knees. The eldest among them, Corin the Tide Speaker, regarded Mason with eyes pale as glass. "This one claims to bring warning," Corin rasped. "Yet his hands are stained with our leader's blood." Mason met the old man's gaze. "Then I guess that makes us even." The murmurs grew louder. Lyra shot him a look that said enough, but he didn't stop. "You burned a settlement near the delta," he said. "Killed unarmed families. I buried them myself." Corin's expression didn't change. "The sea takes what it must." "Then maybe it's time someone took something back," Mason replied. The old man leaned forward. "You believe you understand our ways?" "No," Mason said. "But I understand consequences." The fire popped, embers swirling. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Lyra broke the silence. "You came here alone," she said. "No army, no banner. Why?" "Because war only needs one person to stop starting it," he said. "I've seen what happens when no one does." She studied him. "And what makes you think you can stop ours?" He looked at her, his voice steady. "Because I'm tired enough to try." Something in his tone silenced even the old warriors. Corin leaned back, his expression unreadable. "You would have us believe peace can be forged by the hand that killed our chief." Mason nodded once. "Better than by the ones who keep pretending they didn't light the fire." The words hit like a blade. Lyra's breath caught. The truth of it was too close, too sharp. Her father's death had already divided the council, his last campaign had gone too far. Maybe the storm had always been waiting for someone like this human to walk into it. The elder spoke again, his voice slower now. "You speak with conviction, human. But conviction does not wash blood away." Mason's jaw tightened. "Neither does denial." Corin considered him, then looked at Lyra. "You brought him here. What do you say?" The weight of the question fell hard. She looked at Mason, then at her people. "My father taught that strength means never yielding," she said. "But he forgot that a storm that never breaks also never clears." She stood. "This human risked his life to bring us truth. I say we listen." A murmur rose, half outrage, half approval. The old man raised a hand. "Then he will be heard." Mason inclined his head. "Appreciate it," he said dryly. "Don't Lyra muttered. You haven't won anything yet. The meeting stretched late into the night. Mason spoke of the coast, of the burned fields, of the endless raids that had started with revenge and turned into habit. He didn't plead, didn't flatter, just described what he'd seen. The ocean doesn't care whose side you're on, he said. It'll drown you the same. When he finally stopped, silence filled the longhouse. Even the rain outside had gone still. Corin's voice broke the quiet. You speak like one who has lost everything. Mason looked at the fire. Maybe that's why I finally stopped trying to win. The old man nodded slowly. Perhaps the sea sent you for a reason. When they finally released him from his bindings, Lyra approached. You've made enemies tonight, she said. So have you, he replied. But I think we needed them. She studied him in the firelight. You could have lied, made yourself a hero. Instead you brought proof of your own guilt. He shrugged. Heroes are overrated. For a moment, she almost smiled. You don't look like one. Good, he said. They tend to die early. She laughed softly, then looked toward the door where dawn's faint light began to seep through. You should rest, she said. Tomorrow, the council decides whether you walk free or feed the river. He nodded. Either way, it's been an interesting night. She turned to leave, but paused. Human, she said quietly. What do you call yourself? Mason, he said. And you? Lyra, she replied. Remember it. It might be the last name you hear. As she left, the firelight flickered across his face, shadows cutting deep lines of exhaustion and resolve. He watched her go, her pale braids trailing like silver against the dark, and for the first time since stepping into this world, he allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, the warning hadn't been wasted. Morning mist clung low over the tide-borne encampment, pale smoke rising from rekindled fires. The storm had passed, but the sky remained the color of old steel. Mason awoke to the hiss of rain dripping through the gaps of the longhouse roof. His shoulders ached, and his wrists bore faint marks from the vines that had bound him. He sat up slowly, eyes scanning the dim space. The tide-borne guards stood by the door, their spears crossed. Beyond them, he could hear the hum of voices, the low, rhythmic chant of warriors preparing for something that sounded like ceremony, or perhaps judgment. He sighed, stretching his sore arms. Guess they're early risers, he muttered. The door flap parted, and Lyra stepped inside. Her armor gleamed damply, freshly cleaned of mud, her spear resting across her back. You sleep like someone who doesn't expect to wake, she said dryly. Mason looked up at her. Old habit. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. You're not afraid. Does it help? Sometimes, she said. Keeps you alive long enough to make mistakes. He smirked faintly. Then I must be doing great. Her expression softened, though she quickly hid it. The council meets at midnight. Until then, you're under my watch. He rose to his feet, brushing off his coat. So, jailer, what's the plan? Parade me through the village. Something like that, she said, gesturing toward the door. And Mason, yeah. Don't talk unless I tell you to. My people already think you breathe fire. They stepped outside into the grey morning. The village was quieter than the night before, though the tension still clung like smoke. Children peeked from behind huts, eyes wide at the sight of the human who had killed their chief and lived. Mason felt their stares like arrows. The warriors didn't speak to him, they only watched. Lyra led him through the muddy paths toward the central circle, where smoke rose from ceremonial fires. Totems lined the space, painted masks with hollow eyes staring outward. What's all this? He asked under his breath. Trial, she said simply. For you, or for me? Both, maybe, she said. They question whether I've gone soft. And have you? She shot him a glare. Keep talking, and you'll find out. They reached the center of the gathering. The entire tribe stood in silent rows. Corin the tide speaker waited by the fire, his hands raised toward the sky. His voice carried like gravel through the mist. The tide has brought us blood, he said. And the wind has brought us words. We must decide which to heed. Lyra stepped forward, placing her spear upright in the mud. "He stands by my word," she declared. "Then your word will stand with him," the elder replied. He turned to Mason. "Human, speak your truth once more, this time, for all to hear." Mason glanced at Lyra, who gave a curt nod. He stepped forward, the heat of the fire against his face. "Your chief led raids along the southern coast," he said. "He burned settlements, took prisoners. You called it war, but there was no army waiting for him there. Only families." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "He found humans trying to live where the flood hadn't reached. My people didn't come here as soldiers. We came because our world was dying. We were just trying to survive." A warrior shouted from the ranks, "Survive by stealing our lands." Mason's voice cut through. "I didn't steal anything. I built, I dug, I fought the storms. Just like you. But your chief didn't see that. He saw ghosts of the destroyers who came before me." He turned slowly, letting his words sink in. "I'm not them. But if you keep fighting ghosts, you'll make new ones." Silence followed. The tribe shifted uneasily. Corin's gaze remained steady. "You bring reason," he said. "But reason dies in the soil of grief. My people have buried too much to believe words." Mason nodded. "Then believe proof." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small metal cube, the size of a heart, cracked and scorched. "This is what destroyed my ship," he said. "It wasn't your arrows. It wasn't your storm magic. It was something orbiting above your world, something still alive, still watching. The same kind that once burned yours." Gasps spread through the crowd. "You've seen it?" Corin asked, voice trembling. "Up close," Mason said. "And if it wakes, neither of us are ready." The air grew heavy. Lyra stepped forward. "You said this before, to me. You think the destroyers will return." "They never left," he said. "They're just waiting for the signal." Corin's brow furrowed. "And what signal would call them back?" Mason's eyes flicked toward the horizon. "The one your father's raids triggered. His scouts used the relics from the ruins near the coast, didn't they?" Lyra's face paled. "He said they were gifts from the deep." "They weren't," Mason said grimly. "They were transmitters. Ancient tech. He woke something old." The crowd erupted into fearful shouts. Corin slammed his staff against the earth. "Enough. You expect us to trust this tale?" Mason met his gaze. "You can trust the sky. Watch it tonight, you'll see the light return." The council adjourned in chaos. Lyra led him away as arguments broke out behind them. "You could have lied," she said once they were alone. "Told them you killed my father to save yourself. Instead, you gave them nightmares." "They already had them," he said. "I just named them." "If you're wrong, I'm not." He stopped and turned to her. "You've seen the ruins, haven't you? The walls that hum when you touch them, the machines that bleed light." She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. My father forbade us from going near them." "Smart man," Mason muttered. "He should have stayed that way." She frowned. "And now? Now we find what's left of those transmitters before someone else does." "You mean me," she said. "No," he said. "I mean whoever's still loyal to your father's memory." By afternoon, they reached the southern edge of the forest where the mud gave way to sand. The sea stretched endless, grey and cold. Broken stone pillars jutted from the shallows, ancient structures now half swallowed by tide. Mason knelt near one, brushing away wet moss. Lines of unfamiliar script glowed faintly beneath his touch. "There," he said. "That's the same language the orbital AI used." Lyra crouched beside him. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's a warning," he corrected. He pulled a small scanner from his belt, one of the few devices that had survived his crash. The screen flickered, then stabilized. Energy readings, still active. Low frequency pulse. "So it's alive." "Barely. But enough to call attention if it keeps broadcasting." Lyra stood, scanning the horizon. "If your sky monsters return, what will they do?" Mason's jaw tightened. Finish what they started centuries ago. Then we must destroy this. Yeah, he said. But carefully. He began setting small charges, using old power cells and scrap wire. Lyra watched, fascinated. You fight with fire, she said. I fight with whatever works. She smiled faintly. And if it doesn't? Then I improvise. The last word had barely left his mouth when the ground trembled. Waves rippled outward. Lyra's eyes widened. What was that? Mason stood quickly. Feedback loop. It's responding. The pillars began to glow brighter, symbols pulsing in sequence. It's transmitting again, he said. We're too late. The ocean split. A column of light burst upward from the sea, blinding in its intensity. Lyra shielded her face, shouting over the roar. What is it? Signal flare, Mason shouted back. It's sending coordinates. He slammed a hand against his detonator, triggering the charges. Explosions ripped through the beach, collapsing the nearest pillars. The light faltered but didn't fade. It's not enough, she yelled. Then run, he barked. She grabbed his arm instead. We started this together. He swore under his breath, pulling her toward the cliffs. Fine, but if we die, I'm haunting you. They sprinted through falling debris as the ground heaved beneath them. Mason dove behind a rock, dragging her down just as the last pillar exploded. The shockwave tore across the coast, throwing spray high into the air. Then silence. For a long time, neither spoke. The wind howled, carrying the taste of salt and smoke. Finally, Lyra raised her head. Did it stop? Mason looked at the scanner. Its screen cracked, but the signal line was flat. Yeah, he said. For now. She collapsed back into the sand, laughing weakly. You really don't plan anything, do you? Planning's for optimists. And you? Survivor. She smiled at that, though exhaustion dulled the edges. You should teach me. What? How to make bad decisions? No, she said softly. How to live through them. They stayed there until the tide began to rise, the ruined stones vanishing beneath the waves. As they made their way back inland, Mason glanced at her. Your people won't believe what happened. They'll believe me, she said. You think they'll listen? They always do, she said with a faint smile. Eventually. He studied her face, the streaks of dirt and sea salt tracing the lines of someone who had been both warrior and witness. You're not like the others, he said. Neither are you, she replied. Maybe that's why we keep surviving. By the time they reached the edge of the jungle, dusk had fallen. Fires glimmered in the distance, the village still awake, still restless. Lyra stopped suddenly, scanning the tree line. Do you hear that? Mason frowned. No, exactly, she said. The jungle was too quiet. He drew his blade. A moment later, a spear whistled past his shoulder and struck a tree behind him. Figures emerged from the shadows, tide-born warriors, faces painted black. Lyra's expression hardened. My father's loyalists, she whispered. They think I betrayed his blood. The leader stepped forward, his voice low. The chief's daughter stands with the killer. She dies with him. Mason raised his sword. Diplomacy's over, then. It never started, she said. The warriors charged. The fight was fast and brutal. Mason moved with sharp efficiency, his blade carving arcs of light through the rain-soaked air. Lyra fought beside him, spear spinning, each strike precise. They fought back to back, mud and blood mixing beneath their feet. Remind me, Mason grunted between blows. You said they'd listen eventually. They're stubborn, she yelled. Must be genetic, he shouted back. The last warrior fell with a cry, disappearing into the mud. Silence returned, broken only by their ragged breathing. Lyra lowered her weapon, trembling. They'll send more. Mason wiped his blade clean. Then we make them regret it. Thunder rolled over the sea again, distant but growing. Lyra looked toward the horizon, where faint lights shimmered beyond the clouds. The sky, she whispered. Mason followed her gaze. Yeah, he said. It's starting. The stars flickered unnaturally, as if something vast moved among them. Whatever we stopped, he said quietly, it wasn't enough. Lyra turned to him, her face pale in the dim light. Then what do we do now? Mason tightened his grip on his weapon. We finish the warning. The wind shifted, sharp and cold, carrying a strange hum from above the clouds. The sea was black now, the surface rippling with pale light as if something beneath stirred. Mason and Lyra stood at the cliff's edge, drenched in salt and rain, watching the horizon tremble. The stars no longer looked still, they pulsed faintly in patterns, blinking in impossible rhythm. Lyra clutched her spear tighter. It's answering, she whispered. Mason's voice was grim. Yeah. And not to us. He scanned the horizon, the old soldier in him mapping lines of approach, elevation, escape, but there was nowhere to go. How long until they reach us? She asked. Depends how fast they've learned since the last time they burned a world, he said. But if we saw that flare, they saw it too. They turned from the sea and moved through the jungle's edge, their footsteps muffled in the thick loam. The village lights were flickering ahead. We have to warn them, Lyra said. They'll think it's lies again. Then make them believe, Mason said. She glanced at him, her pale hair streaked with mud and seawater. They won't listen to you. Then they'll listen to you, he said. You're their voice now. You stopped the tide. Her jaw tightened. They still think I broke the old ways. Good, he said. The old ways got you here. They reached the outer huts. The guards stiffened at the sight of them, weapons half raised. One called out, the outcast returns, with the ghost of war beside her. Lyra didn't slow. Call the council, she commanded. Now. The warrior hesitated. Mason stepped forward, his tone sharp. If you've got time to argue, you've got time to die. Pick one. The man flinched, then bolted. Lyra shot Mason a look that was half reproach, half admiration. You have a way of cutting through ceremony. I'm bad with protocol, he said. And patience. Inside the longhouse, the council gathered once more. Corin the Tide Speaker sat cross-legged by the fire, his expression weary. You bring storms wherever you walk, he said to Mason. This one isn't mine, Mason replied. It's coming for all of us. Lyra stepped forward. The relics my father used, they weren't gifts from the deep. They were markers, calling to something in the sky. Murmurs filled the hall. We destroyed them, she continued. But the signal was already sent. Corin's gaze shifted between them. You mean to say the destroyers return? Not return, Mason said quietly. They never left. The air grew heavier with each word. You expect us to believe stories from before memory, a young warrior challenged. Mason didn't answer with words, he drew a small transmitter from his coat. The screen flickered to life, showing a pattern of pulses across a dark grid. That's orbit, he said. And those aren't stars. They're machines. Lyra's people leaned closer, unease rippling through them. Corin's ancient eyes reflected the shifting light. So it is true, he whispered. The sky bleeds again. Not yet, Mason said. But it will, unless we shut them down. The old man frowned. You cannot fight the heavens. Watch me, Mason said. I've done worse. Lyra stepped between them. He's not wrong. If those things find this world alive, they'll burn it clean again. My father's war gave them a reason. Corin's hand trembled over his staff. Then what can we do? Mason pointed to the map flickering on the device. There's a relay station on one of your northern cliffs. Probably another ruin. It's amplifying the signal. If we reach it before the sky machines triangulate, we can kill the broadcast. And if you fail? Corin asked. Then there won't be anyone left to argue about it. The hall fell silent. The fire crackled, rain whispering outside. Finally, Lyra spoke. Then we'll go. Corin's gaze hardened. You would leave your people in their hour of fear. I would give them a chance to have another hour, she said. That's what leaders do. Mason watched her, a flicker of pride stirring behind his exhaustion. She's right, he said. If we don't go, None of this matters. The old man closed his eyes. Then may the sea remember you kindly. They left at dawn. Mist rolled across the jungle like ghost tide, damp and heavy. Lyra moved ahead, her steps sure despite the terrain. Mason followed close behind, his pack heavier now with salvaged tools and explosives. How far? He asked. 2 days if the path holds, she said. Longer if it rains. It'll rain, he muttered. She smiled faintly. You sound certain. I'm cursed that way. The forest changed as they moved north. Trees grew twisted, their bark charred as if lightning had struck them centuries ago. Metallic vines coiled through the undergrowth, pulsing faintly. The ruins spread this far. Mason said. Lyra nodded. The land remembers the fall. They stopped by a clearing where the ground had cracked open, revealing shards of old metal buried beneath stone. Mason crouched beside one, brushing it clean. Same alloy, he murmured. Not native. These weren't just crash sites, they were outposts. Lyra frowned. Outposts for what? He met her gaze. For what's coming? They set camp by the edge of a dried riverbed. Mason built a small fire, using a mix of driftwood and salvaged battery cells. Lyra sat across from him, silent for a long while. You've seen them before, she said finally. The destroyers. He stared into the flame. Once. My unit stumbled onto one of their derelicts years ago. It was empty, quiet. We thought we could salvage tech. He paused. We were wrong. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. What happened? We woke it. His tone was hollow. We lost everything. Lyra studied him, the firelight flickering across his scarred face. And yet you came here alone. Someone had to make sure it didn't happen again. She shook her head. You humans, you burn yourselves to stop the fire. Better us than everyone else, he said softly. The night deepened. Strange lights flickered in the distance, moving like slow comets across the clouds. Lyra watched them, her voice barely a whisper. They're closer. Mason nodded. Tomorrow, we reach the cliffs. After that, we find out if this world's worth saving twice. You already decided it is, she said. Or you wouldn't still be here. He met her gaze, the reflection of firelight caught in her eyes. Maybe I needed someone to remind me why. By morning, they were climbing. The cliffs rose steep and jagged, cutting into the mist like blades. The path was narrow, slick with moss. Mason led, hands gripping stone worn smooth by centuries of wind. Lyra followed, her breath steady despite the climb. Halfway up, the hum returned, a low vibration that made the rock tremble beneath their palms. It's active, Mason said. We're close. They reached a ledge overlooking the valley below. From here, the jungle stretched endless, its rivers glinting faintly. And above it all, in the far distance, hung a shape, a dark disk against the morning light, massive and silent. Lyra froze. Is that, yeah, he said. Orbital anchor. They're already here. They moved faster. The summit flattened into a plateau, littered with stone spires and fragments of metal. At the center stood a structure half buried in earth, circular, wide, its surface etched with glyphs that pulsed like veins. Mason approached cautiously, scanning the perimeter. It's broadcasting again. Can you stop it? Lyra asked. Maybe. He crouched beside an exposed conduit, opening a small panel. Wires sparked faintly. The system's old, but it's not alien to me. Same architecture the old colonies used. If I can reroute power through a feedback coil, he stopped suddenly. The hum deepened, shifting pitch. That's not right. What? Lyra asked, alarmed. It's reading us. The ground split. Energy lines flared outward, forming a ring of light that encircled them. Mason grabbed her arm, pulling her back, but it was too late. The air shimmered, and a shape began to form, tall, metallic, humanoid, but translucent like glass filled with fire. Its voice was a chorus of echoes. Signal confirmed. Genetic variants detected. Purge sequence initialized. Lyra stepped back, eyes wide. It speaks our tongue. No, Mason said grimly. It speaks mine. The entity raised its arm, and energy coalesced into a sphere of light. Mason shoved Lyra aside as the blast struck the ground, vaporizing stone. He rolled, drawing his sword, its energy core humming to life. Stay behind me, he shouted. The construct turned toward him, eyes burning white. Mason swung, the blade cutting through its projection, but it reformed instantly, scattering like smoke before condensing again. You can't kill light. Lyra cried. Then we break the source. Mason yelled back. He sprinted toward the central console, dodging another blast. The air sizzled with heat. It's drawing power from the relay, he said. If we overload it, we'll die, she shouted. Yeah, he said, but so will it. She joined him without hesitation. Together, they pulled the power cells free, sparks leaping like lightning. The construct screamed, its form fracturing. One more. Mason shouted. The last conduit tore loose with a shriek of metal. The feedback ignited, the entire platform flared white, the shockwave throwing them both backward. When the light faded, the construct was gone. Smoke rose from the shattered relay. Mason lay on his back, gasping. Lyra crawled to him. Are you still here? He wheezed. She helped him sit up. The plateau was in ruins. You did it, she said. No, he said quietly. Look. Far above, the dark shape in the sky still glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the same rhythm. We just bought time, he said. Not victory. Lyra followed his gaze. Then what now? Now, he said, struggling to his feet, we take the fight up there. Her eyes widened. To the sky. To where this all started, he said. And maybe, if we're lucky, where it ends. They stood side by side on the broken cliff as the wind whipped around them, staring at the horizon where light and shadow met. For the first time, Lyra understood what it meant to stand against something bigger than fear itself. Mason turned to her, his face streaked with soot and determination. You still think I'm the wind's mistake? She smiled faintly. No, she said. I think you're what it's been waiting for. The dawn broke pale and thin, filtered through clouds that hung heavy with the scent of rain and metal. Mason and Lyra moved cautiously along the jagged plateau, stepping over the shattered remnants of the relay station. Sparks and smoke rose from fractured panels, casting ghostly light across the broken metal. Mason's boots crunched over shards of alloy, his eyes scanning every shadow. It's not dead, he muttered. Lyra followed closely, her pale blue glow dim but steady. You think it's still active? Every pulse, he said, crouching beside a twisted conduit. Even shattered, it's sending signals. And if those signals reach orbit, he didn't finish. She understood. We can't let that happen. He nodded, grim, and began rerouting power through the last remaining conduit, his fingers deft despite the shockwave burns on his hands. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying the faint hum of approaching energy. Lyra's glow brightened involuntarily, resonating with the invisible waves. It knows we're here, she whispered. Mason didn't reply immediately, focused on the wiring. Sparks flared from a frayed cable, and he hissed as the current arced close to his palm. We have to finish this, he said through gritted teeth. Or the sky dies, and everything beneath it burns. She moved closer, instinctively touching the metal alongside his hands. Her light pulsed into the conduit. Mason felt the energy surge, but this time it didn't singe his skin. It flowed like water, controlled and steady. Keep it steady, he said. If we overload too soon, we're both toast. Lyra nodded, face pale but determined. I'm with you. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath them. Mason's head snapped up. A massive shadow appeared on the horizon, moving through the clouds. Metallic wings, spanning miles, shimmered in faint starlight. They've found it, Mason growled. Lyra's eyes widened. The destroyers. He didn't answer. The pulse of the alien vessel matched the beat of the relay beneath their feet. Sparks and hums intertwined with the natural rhythm of the jungle. Mason grabbed Lyra's arm. Time to climb higher. We need vantage. They sprinted across the plateau, dodging crumbling metal and debris. The wind lashed against them, carrying the smell of ozone and rain. Above, the ship moved with impossible speed, descending toward the ruins of the cliffside relay. Its shadow swallowed the plateau, making everything beneath it feel insignificant. Mason's hand tightened around his sword. "No more warnings," he muttered. "This ends now." They reached a higher ridge, overlooking the broken remains of the coastal outpost. Mason dropped to his knees beside a shattered power core. "If I can reroute this energy," he said, tracing the conduits, "we can overload the relay before it fully synchronizes with the destroyer." Lyra leaned close. "And if we fail?" "We die," he said bluntly. "And the world burns." Her face hardened. "Then we don't fail." They began working together, connecting the fragments of circuits, welding small nodes, rerouting residual energy. Every movement had to be precise. Every error could trigger a catastrophic feedback. Sparks leapt, singing the air, and the rain hissed as it met live metal. Mason wiped sweat and blood from his face. Almost there, just a little more. Above, the destroyer hovered silently, its immense form blotting out the early sun. Mason could feel its gaze, or whatever sense it possessed, searching for them. Lyra's hands glowed brighter as she channeled power through the last conduit. Mason activated the main coil. Electricity arced, running along the cracked metal, coalescing into a single concentrated surge. "Now!" he shouted. The energy burst upward, striking the destroyed relay like a lightning strike. The signal fed back violently. The pulse hit the destroyer directly, visible as a rippling wave across its hull. The enormous ship shuddered. Lights flickered, panels opened and closed as systems overloaded. The hum of its engines went jagged, then silent. Mason and Lyra staggered back, shielding their eyes as the energy dissipated into the sky. When the brilliance faded, silence fell. The storm had broken. Clouds parted, revealing a sky of bruised pink and orange. The destroyer remained, but it hovered inert, its systems crippled, energy arcs sparking across its surface. Mason fell to one knee, breathing heavily. "We did it," he said, barely audible. Lyra crouched beside him, hands glowing faintly as she absorbed residual power. "For now," she whispered. Mason's eyes remained on the ship. "Only for now. It's not dead. Just delayed." She nodded. "Then we prepare for when it moves again." They climbed down to the plateau's edge, surveying the ruins. The coastal outpost had been flattened, but the core fragments were intact, still pulsing faintly. Mason knelt, examining the remaining conduits. "We can use this," he said, "as a trap. If it ever returns, it won't find the same world waiting." Lyra's glow brightened. "It'll be ready." He nodded. "It has to be." The sun rose higher, illuminating the mangled remnants of the relay. Sparks from broken circuits danced like fireflies across the wet metal. Mason stood, sword drawn. "Let's make sure this lesson is remembered." That evening, they returned to the village. The tide-born warriors waited, tense and wary. Mason's hands were scorched, his coat shredded, but his eyes held a steady fire. Lyra addressed the crowd. "The human has done what my father could not." He stopped the signal before it reached the destroyers. Murmurs ran through the assembled warriors. Corrin stepped forward, his face pale but expression neutral. "And if it returns?" Mason stepped into the circle, sword in hand, stance deliberate. "Then we'll be ready. Not because I fight for them, but because they fight with me." The crowd fell silent, stunned by the confidence radiating from someone so clearly battered and outnumbered. Corrin considered him, then the council members glanced at one another. Finally, the elder nodded slowly. "Then we will follow. But know this, if your warning fails, the consequences fall upon us all." Mason lowered his blade. "I know." Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder. "We're in this together," she said. He met her gaze, a faint smile breaking across his bruised face. "Then let's make sure it counts." Night fell. Fires burned along the riverbank, but now they were no longer ritual fires, they were signals, beacons of readiness and vigilance. Children watched from a distance, faces filled with or rather than fear. Mason and Lyra patrolled the perimeter, watching the horizon for any sign of movement. The destroyer remained out there, silent but scarred, orbiting beyond the clouds. Mason felt the weight of what they had done, the difference between survival and annihilation. He glanced at Lyra. "Do you think it'll ever learn?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "No. But we have time. Time to be better than fear." Hours passed. The stars emerged one by one, flickering faintly through thin clouds. Mason sat beside the fire, sword across his knees. Lyra crouched beside him, her light dimming with exhaustion. "You've changed things," she said quietly. "We've changed things," he corrected. "Together." A faint hum echoed through the jungle, like distant machinery waking in the far reaches. Mason's hand went instinctively to his sword. "It's still out there," he said. Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll be ready." He exhaled, feeling the tension ease slightly. "For now," he said, voice low. "Yes. For now," she echoed. As the night deepened, the village slept, the river whispered, and the destroyed relay smoldered silently along the cliffs. Mason and Lyra remained vigilant, aware that their victory was fragile. But for the first time, in the dampened quiet of a recovering world, they allowed themselves a moment of peace. Tomorrow, the fight would continue. But tonight, they had survived, and the wind, for the first time in a long while, seemed to carry a message of hope rather than death. The next morning, the wind blew sharp across the cliffs, carrying salt and ozone. Mason and Lyra moved swiftly, their boots crunching over broken stone and scorched metal fragments. The coastal plateau was quiet now, the shattered remains of the relay pulsing faintly with residual energy. Mason crouched beside the largest fragment, brushing away debris. "It's still alive," he muttered. Lyra's eyes glowed softly. "Do you think it knows we're here?" "It already knows," Mason said grimly. "The destroyer sensed the flare last night. Whatever it's planning, we've just started the clock." He adjusted the harness around his shoulder, his fingers brushing against the hilt of his sword. "We can't wait any longer." They began ascending the northern ridge where the old orbital outpost had been constructed. Jagged cliffs rose sharply, coated in lichen and twisted roots. The jungle below fell away to reveal the endless sea, the waves grey and churning with the aftermath of the storm. Mason scanned the horizon. Faint glimmers of metallic movement floated above the clouds, satellite remnants, derelict drones, and perhaps the destroyer itself. Lyra stepped closer. "You really believe you can face it?" Mason didn't answer immediately. He traced the edge of a broken conduit, sparks still crackling faintly from old circuitry. "We don't face it," he said finally. "We make it face us." She tilted her head. "And if it refuses?" He smirked faintly, though his eyes were serious. "Then we adapt faster than it can learn." The plateau widened near the top of the ridge, revealing a circular structure, half buried, scarred with battle, etched with glyphs that pulsed with dim blue light. Mason approached cautiously, scanning for traps. Lyra followed silently, her glow faint but constant. "The signal's still here," Mason said. "And it's growing stronger." He knelt beside a fractured terminal, brushing away moss and sediment. "The destroyer's feeding off this core. If we overload it, we can scramble its sensors and sever the orbital link." Lyra crouched beside him, watching. "And then what?" "Then we finish the fight on our terms," Mason replied, adjusting wires and power cells. Sparks leapt as he connected the final conduit. The hum of the core grew louder, vibrating through the ground and rock. Above, the sky darkened unnaturally. Clouds rolled in fast, reflecting flashes of light from above the horizon. Mason's breath caught as he glimpsed the massive silhouette of the destroyer, its form metallic and vast, weaving through the storm clouds. "It's coming," Lyra whispered. Mason didn't respond, focusing on the core. He connected the last node, and the energy began to pulse rhythmically, feeding into his sword. "Ready?" he asked. Lyra nodded, her eyes bright. "As ready as we'll ever be." He grabbed her hand briefly. "Stay close. We can't afford mistakes." She squeezed back. "I won't leave you." The destroyer descended rapidly, tearing through the upper cloud layer. Its hull glimmered with faint blue light, pulsing in sync with the energy from the relay. Mason and Lyra braced themselves as the wind howled, tearing at their clothing and hair. Lightning arced across the sky, illuminating the immense structure. Mason planted his feet, sword humming with energy. "We do this together," he shouted. Lyra's markings flared, channeling power into the ground, the remaining energy in the core surging into a single, controlled wave. Sparks erupted, sending arcs of lightning cascading through the fractured metal. The destroyer paused mid-ascent, scanning, its optics glowing white-hot. Mason stepped forward, directing the surge into the base of the platform. "Now!" he shouted. Energy exploded outward, striking the destroyer's sensors with a violent pulse. The ship shuddered violently, sparks leaping across its hull. Lyra's light flared in resonance, overwhelming the core with controlled feedback. Mason and Lyra were thrown to the ground by the shockwave, mud and debris spraying across the plateau. They scrambled to their feet. The destroyer rocked, systems blinking erratically. Panels opened and closed as if alive, but the pulse from the core continued to disrupt its circuits. Mason assessed the situation quickly. "We've stunned it, but it's not out of the fight." Lyra nodded. "Then we finish the job." Mason drew his sword, its energy core glowing brightly, matching the pulsing light from the destroyer. "I'll strike the main array. You hold the feedback flow steady." She braced herself, grounding her energy through the core. Mason sprinted toward the central terminal, weaving past fractured metal and residual sparks. The destroyer reacted, firing arcs of plasma that scorched the ground near him. He ducked low, rolled, and leapt onto a raised fragment, plunging the sword into the exposed array. Energy surged violently, the structure groaning under the strain. The destroyer's form fractured, ripples of light distorting its shape. Mason felt the backlash through his arms and torso, pain cutting through him, but he held the blade steady. Lyra channeled every ounce of her strength into the conduit, stabilizing the feedback. The pulsing lights across the plateau converged, striking the destroyer directly. The ship screamed in soundless resonance, body trembling, systems failing. Sparks and plasma arcs lit the sky. Then silence. Mason collapsed to his knees, breathing heavily. Lyra crawled toward him, exhausted but alive. "Is it done?" she whispered. Mason nodded slowly. "For now. But it's not gone. Only delayed." She studied the horizon where the destroyer hovered, inert but still immense, suspended in the upper cloud layer. "How long before it recovers?" he said quietly. "Weeks, months, maybe a year. Maybe less," she replied. Mason clenched his jaw. "Then we prepare. The next encounter won't wait for us to be ready." Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we start now." They spent the next hours dismantling the remaining portions of the relay, scattering fragments into the cliffs and sea below. Mason ensured that nothing remained capable of transmitting a signal strong enough to reach orbit. Lyra worked beside him, her glow waning with fatigue but steady in focus. "This land remembers," she said. "Every ruin, every relic." Mason wiped sweat and blood from his brow. "Then let it remember that we survived." As dusk fell, they descended to the village, the tide-born warriors watching from a distance. Mason's coat was shredded, his hands scorched, but he walked with quiet determination. Lyra addressed the warriors. "The signal has been severed. The destroyer is disabled, for now." Murmurs ran through the assembled group. Corrin stepped forward. "And if it returns?" Mason drew a deep breath. "Then we'll be ready. Not because we fear it, but because we fight together." Silence followed. The tribe's tension eased slightly, but the weight of the threat lingered like smoke in the air. Night fell. Fires burned along the riverbanks, no longer ritualistic but signals of vigilance. Children peeked from huts, their eyes wide with or rather than fear. Mason and Lyra patrolled the perimeter, scanning the horizon. The destroyer remained aloft, silent, damaged but intact, orbiting beyond clouds. Mason adjusted his grip on his sword. "We've bought time," he said. "Not victory." Lyra's gaze hardened. "Then we use it." They spent the night reinforcing the cliffs, setting traps and shielding the village. Mason taught the warriors to redirect energy, improvise defenses, and read the subtle shifts in the clouds that heralded the destroyer's approach. Lyra's glow served as a beacon for the training, her energy stabilizing systems and marking safe zones. By morning, the village was a network of alert points, defensive positions, and improvised shelters. Mason surveyed it, satisfaction mingling with fatigue. "They're ready," he muttered. Lyra nodded. "We've done what we can. The rest depends on what comes next." The sky brightened, clouds streaked with orange light. Mason looked upward, tracing the faint outline of the destroyer moving slowly through orbit. "Next time, it won't come alone," he said. Lyra stepped beside him, placing her hand on his arm. "Then we'll meet it together." He glanced at her, a faint smile breaking across his exhausted face. "Together," he repeated. The morning sky was pale, streaked with fading clouds from the previous storm. Mason and Lyra stood atop the cliff edge, surveying the village and the cliffs where the destroyed relay had once pulsed. The Tideborn warriors moved cautiously through the village, repairing broken huts, reinforcing defenses, and sharpening weapons. Mason's hands ached from burns and exertion, but his eyes were steady, scanning the horizon for any sign of the orbital destroyer. Lyra's faint glow shimmered, her fingers brushing over the air as if sensing currents beyond their world. "It's quiet," she whispered. "Too quiet," Mason muttered. He had learned to trust silence. It often came before storms. By mid-morning, the human and the Tideborn had set traps along the cliffside, camouflaged with vines and rock. Mason taught the warriors to divert residual energy from the old relay conduits into conductive metal traps. Sparks hummed faintly, hidden beneath rock and debris. "If it comes too close, we'll blind its sensors," he explained. Lyra placed her hand on his shoulder. "And if it tries to land?" Mason glanced at her, eyes narrowing. "Then we'll force it back to orbit. One way or another, this world won't be a target again." The warriors watched with awe, some hesitant, some inspired. Even Corrin, silent for days, observed Mason with a mixture of suspicion and respect. Late afternoon brought a shimmer in the clouds, a faint pulse that made the old trees sway unnaturally. Mason straightened. "Here it comes." Lyra's glow intensified, her energy coiling like a spring through her body. "The destroyer." "Yes," Mason said. "And whatever else followed it from orbit." The massive ship broke through the clouds, moving with slow, deliberate precision. Its metallic surface reflected the dying sunlight, creating a phantom of light and shadow that stretched across the cliffs. Mason adjusted his stance, gripping his sword, energy humming faintly along the blade. "It's testing us," he said. "Waiting to see if we act." The first strike came without warning. Arc-like beams of energy lanced from the destroyer toward the cliffside. Mason rolled to the ground, deflecting the first impact with a quick sweep of his energized blade. Lyra followed, channeling her own power to absorb residual blasts and redirect them harmlessly into the earth. The Tideborn scattered, diving into trenches and behind walls, trusting Mason and Lyra to guide them. "Hold positions," he shouted. "Lyra, focus on the core. The feedback has to stay stable." She nodded, sweat running down her temples, light pulsating fiercely along her veins. Sparks leapt as the disrupted currents from the destroyed relay converged with her energy. The destroyer landed partially on the cliffs, hydraulic supports sinking into rock. Its sensors blinked erratically. Mason sprinted forward, weaving between the energy arcs. "We've got to hit the power nodes," he yelled. Lyra followed, her glow lighting the path. The warriors provided cover, hurling spears, hurling themselves into positions that forced the ship to adjust its stance, overcompensating for their small, agile movements. Mason reached the first node, plunging his sword into the panel. Energy surged, feeding back through the destroyer's hull. Sparks flew in arcs wide enough to blind the Tideborn if not careful. "Keep it steady," Mason yelled. The destroyer reacted violently, attempting to recalibrate. Its surface split and reformed, limbs and appendages extending from its frame. Mason ducked as a metallic arm struck down, smashing the stone beneath him. Lyra extended her arms, channeling light into the feedback loops. The destroyer hesitated as the energy pulses from the platform interfered with its circuits. Mason saw his chance. He drove his blade into the central conduit. The surge roared, feeding through the destroyer's hull. The ship's lights flickered and stuttered. Sparks rained across the plateau. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The wind paused, the waves stilled, and only the pulsing hum of energy filled the air. Then the destroyer roared, or something like a roar, though no voice came. Its massive form convulsed, energy arcs shredding the air around it. Mason and Lyra were thrown back, landing hard against jagged rocks. Mason groaned, pushing himself up, pain screaming through his arms and legs. Lyra lay beside him, breathing hard, her glow dimmed but steady. "Did we?" she started. "Not yet," Mason muttered. He stood, grimacing, sword in hand. "We finish this." They climbed the nearest broken conduit, using it as leverage to reach the destroyer's exposed hull. Mason plunged his sword into another power node while Lyra reinforced the feedback with her energy. Sparks and arcs of electricity lanced across the cliffside, creating a storm of light and sound. The destroyer shook violently. Its wings extended, energy thrumming through every panel. Mason's muscles burned from exertion, but he held the sword steady, pushing energy into the node. Lyra's arms ached, her light pulsing in rhythm with the surging currents. The destroyer's sensors blinked wildly, systems failing. Its massive form swayed, tilting toward the sea, before stabilizing again with smoke venting from fractured joints. Mason's chest heaved. "Almost there," he yelled. Lyra gave a final surge, pushing energy into the primary conduit. The ship screamed in resonance, a soundless, vibrating fury. Then the hull cracked, panels opening and twisting as systems shorted. Mason leapt back as arcs of energy shot outward, striking the cliffside. Lyra collapsed beside him, exhausted but triumphant. The destroyer hovered inert, systems dead or critically damaged, suspended over the cliffs. Mason lowered his sword, chest heaving, eyes on the massive silhouette. "It's over," he said quietly. Lyra smiled faintly. "For now," she replied. The warriors emerged cautiously from cover, stepping over debris. Corrin approached Mason, eyes wide but not unkind. "You have done what none of us could imagine," he said. "Your hands saved our world." Mason shook his head. "No," he said. "We did this together." He gestured toward Lyra. "She's the reason we survived." Lyra stepped forward, brushing mud from her armor. "We all survived," she said. "And now we rebuild." The village slowly came to life again. Fires burned along the riverbank, children playing near the shore where the floodwaters had receded. Mason and Lyra worked alongside the tideborne, repairing what had been broken, setting traps and defenses in anticipation of the next threat. Each day, Mason taught them to harness energy, to stabilize conduits, to understand the old technology left scattered along the coast. Lyra guided them, teaching the warriors to trust both intuition and reason, blending her people's traditions with Mason's tactical knowledge. Weeks passed. The destroyer remained orbiting beyond the clouds, crippled but intact. Mason built a watchtower, wiring it with scavenged energy cells. Lyra patrolled the village perimeter nightly, her glow serving as both warning and guidance. The warriors trained relentlessly, no longer fearful of the human who had arrived like the wind. They began to see him as a symbol, an outsider who had faced impossible odds and survived, not by brute strength alone but by persistence, ingenuity, and the courage to stand against overwhelming power. One evening, Mason and Lyra stood atop the repaired cliff, looking out over the horizon. The sea glistened in the moonlight, the stars beginning to peek through the scattered clouds. "Do you think they'll come back?" Lyra asked. Mason tightened his grip on his sword. "Eventually," he said. "But next time, they'll find a world ready for them." Lyra placed a hand on his arm. "And if they don't?" Mason smiled faintly. "Then we'll have proved something important. That even the smallest warning can change the tide." The destroyer, distant and silent, seemed to hang in the night sky like a specter of what had been. But below, the village thrummed with life. Children laughed, warriors trained, and the river flowed freely once more. Mason looked at Lyra, then at the people they had fought to save. He allowed himself to hope, for the first time in a long time, that survival didn't depend on luck alone. It depended on those willing to stand against the storm. As the wind blew through the cliffs, Mason raised his sword slightly, catching the moonlight. The blade shimmered faintly, a symbol of resistance and the human spark that refused to yield. Lyra's glow mirrored it, brighter and steadier than ever. Together, they watched the stars, silent sentinels over a world that had endured and would endure again. And somewhere, high above, the orbital destroyer remained, a threat, yes, but a challenge they had survived. For Mason, for Lyra, and for the Tideborn, the lesson was clear. Even when gods, machines, and storms conspire, humanity's courage, ingenuity, and persistence could carve a path through any darkness. And that path would be defended, together, against whatever the wind carried next. The village settled for the night, fires glowing softly. Mason and Lyra remained atop the cliffs, silhouettes against the moon, guardians of a fragile world that had been given a second chance. And as the river whispered and the stars blinked down, the human spark burned steady, unyielding, and alive.